Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It all started with one email, bland subject, corporate tone. I almost deleted it. 5 days later, a stranger was living in my dead father's cabin, claiming it was his. By then, it wasn't just about property. It was war, and I don't lose wars. They say peace is priceless. I used to believe that too, until HOA tried to reassign my mountain cabin to some random guy I'd never met. It started on a gray Thursday morning in Seattle. I had just wrapped up a brutal quarterly compliance review for a tech firm client and was halfway through my second cup of lukewarm office coffee when I got the email. The subject line read, "Community Solidarity Program, Immediate Action Required." I almost deleted it. It looked like another HOA spam broadcast I shouldn't be getting in the first place, but something about the formal tone made me click. That was a mistake. The email came from Maple Crest Summit HOA, a neighborhood association I've had exactly zero interaction with, aside from the occasional glare from a blonde woman in yoga gear when I drive by their gates. I don't live there. Never have, but my private cabin in the Cascades happens to share a boundary line with their overpriced cookie-cutter suburb. Big deal. The message was polite in tone, but the content was pure insanity. They were strongly encouraging me to support their new community placement program designed to help families and individuals in transitional housing crises by voluntarily offering my underutilized secondary residence for temporary hosting. And then came the kicker. As part of our Phase 1 pilot, we have assigned Mr. Jake Dayton to stay at your mountain property for a period of 2 weeks. We trust that, as a contributing neighbor to the Maple Crest family, you will support this goodwill effort. Keys may be delivered via HOA Dropbox for your convenience. I reread the message 3 times. Who the hell was Jake Dayton? And what in God's name made them think they could assign anyone to my cabin, my father's old retreat that I'd inherited and maintained personally for over a decade? I crafted a short, cold reply. This message is inappropriate and invalid. I am not affiliated with your HOA. My property is private and not subject to your authority. Do not contact me again. I sent it, then forwarded it to my firm's legal archive. Something about it reeked of attempted overreach. I spent Friday working from home, waiting to see if they'd respond. Nothing came. I figured it was some kind of glitch or misguided attempt at outreach. I told myself it would blow over. It didn't. That Saturday, I packed up my truck like I did most weekends and drove 2 hours east into the Cascades. The air was crisp and smelled of pine. As I turned off the gravel access road toward my cabin, I noticed something off before I even stopped the engine. The gate had a plastic HOA security seal looped through the latch. My pulse spiked. I parked, got out, and walked up. Hanging on the front porch was a laminated sign with the Maple Crest logo. Temporary housing in progress. Please do not disturb. And sitting next to the welcome mat was a suitcase. A large black Samsonite neatly tagged with the initials J. Dayton. I stood there for a few seconds, just absorbing. What the actual hell? I removed the seal, snapped it off with a multi-tool, and unlocked the front door. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Someone had already been here. There were crumbs on the counter, a half-empty water bottle on the side table, and a jacket slung over the back of the couch. My couch. I was halfway through inspecting the kitchen when the screen door creaked behind me. "You must be Riley," came a voice. I turned to see a man in his mid-30s wearing hiking boots, cargo pants, and an expression of smug entitlement. "Jake Dayton," he said with a grin, extending his hand like we were frat brothers meeting at a reunion. "Karen said you might show up to check on things." I didn't shake his hand. "I own this property," I said evenly. "No one has permission to be here. That includes you." Jake didn't blink. "Karen said everything was squared away. She said you were being difficult by email, but that you'd come around. She dropped the keys for me Thursday night. I'm just settling in. You got a great place, man." I took a deep breath and did what any good lawyer does. Documentation. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You are trespassing on private property," I said clearly. "You do not have the owner's permission to be here. I am the legal owner. I am asking you to vacate immediately." Jake's fake friendliness curdled into annoyance. "Dude, chill. I'm not breaking anything. This is a community arrangement. Karen said you agreed in principle." I didn't respond. I stepped outside, pulled out my other phone, and called the county sheriff's office. Jake watched me from the door with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "You really calling the cops? Over what? Community housing? Over felony trespass, I said. You've got 10 minutes. He muttered something and disappeared back into the cabin. The sheriff's deputy arrived faster than expected, maybe 20 minutes. I recognized him from prior trips into town. Deputy Callahan. Big guy, quiet type. I explained the situation, handed him my deed, ID, and showed him the video I just took. Jake came out with some papers in hand, looking unbothered. This is a mix-up, he said, handing Callahan the printout of the email from HOA. Karen said this was prearranged. Callahan reviewed both sides, then asked Jake to step aside while he called in the HOA records. I stood quietly, letting him do his job. 10 minutes later, another vehicle pulled up, and stepping out in a tailored winter coat and designer boots came the devil herself, Karen Dayton. "I'm so sorry this is happening," she said with mock sympathy, addressing the deputy while completely ignoring me. "There's just been a huge misunderstanding. Riley did agree in principle. He's just gotten cold feet. I'll talk to him." I agreed to nothing. I said flatly, "You forged access and gave out keys to a property that's not under your authority." Karen finally turned to me, lips twitching into a smile like a shark circling its dinner. "We're all neighbors here, Riley. You know the spirit of community. Let's not make a federal case out of hospitality." Callahan interrupted. "Ma'am, you'll need to leave the property unless you have proof of ownership or consent. Right now, it looks like Mr. Shepard is well within his rights." Karen's voice changed. It dropped a few degrees in tone. "Jake had authorization. The cabin falls under the HOA's extended jurisdiction per updated mapping. And there is a digital lease on file. Then you'll need to present that in court," I said. "Because starting Monday, you're going to be named in a criminal complaint for unlawful entry, trespass, and document fraud." Jake tried to interject, but Callahan shut him down. "Sir, step back and clear out. You'll need to go. Now." As they both packed up, I stood silently on my porch, watching the fantasy unravel. Karen didn't say another word, but the way she looked at me said plenty. This wasn't over. She was going to escalate, and I was ready for it. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because my legal brain wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying every second of the encounter, Jake's smirk, Karen's fake sympathy, the digital lease she claimed existed. I knew the type. Manipulative, arrogant, and just stupid enough to believe they're the smartest person in the room. That made her dangerous. The next morning, after replacing the locks and installing a fresh set of motion sensor floodlights, I headed back to Seattle. I figured it was over, for now. But as I stepped into my office Monday morning, my paralegal met me with a raised brow. "Someone dropped this off for you," she said, handing me an official-looking envelope. The return address said Office of Land Use and Records, Catitas County. My stomach sank. Inside was a letter from the county compliance office. The content made my jaw tighten. There had been a formal complaint filed against me by HOA Maplecrest, citing a breach of contractual housing agreement with an attached lease document supposedly signed by me on March 15th, 2 weeks prior. The document was a joke. My name was typed in Comic Sans, for God's sake. The signature was a bad scan of one of my old contracts. I recognized it from a redacted deposition from 2 years ago. They had copied and pasted my signature. But the letter from the county was real. They were requesting a response and threatening an investigation into non-compliance with emergency housing protocols. Emergency housing? Unreal. I called the county office immediately and got a woman named Dana on the line. She sounded annoyed, like she'd already dealt with one too many angry HOA presidents that week. "I'm calling regarding file number 2249-Shepard, I said, already compiling PDFs to send her. "Oh yes," she sighed. "Another one of Karen Dayton's fastballs. We received a bundle from Maplecrest HOA, signed lease, updated zoning map, and community motion. Claimed it was part of your agreement with their housing board. I'm not part of their HOA, never have been, and the lease is forged. I'm emailing you notarized property deeds, a current survey map, and a certified handwriting analysis within the hour." She hesitated. "Wait, you already have handwriting analysis?" "I'm a corporate attorney." "Of course I do." That got a chuckle out of her. "Send everything. I'll flag the complaint as disputed and forward it to our legal review team." Honestly, this isn't the first time she's tried something weird. But this is... Knew I hung up, packed everything into a formal submission, and by lunch, had a 40-page refutation signed, sealed, and sent. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. That feeling was confirmed the next morning when I received a text from my neighbor on the mountainside of my property, Grant Willis, an old-school forestry guy with a cabin a quarter-mile away. "Yo, saw people near your trail again." Looked like HOA folks. One guy in a tie with a camera. "Just FYI, I canceled my meetings, got in the truck, and made it back to the cabin by 3 that afternoon." Sure enough, fresh tire tracks led up the gravel service road, and near the property line, I found survey stakes with pink flags reading HOA border extension, pending approval. Border extension, number no. That evening, I pulled every map, deed, tax record, and registered boundary file I had. Then I called in a favor from a contact at the county assessor's office. Turns out Karen had submitted an amended community boundary map for Maple Crest, backdated 6 months, with my cabin and 2 other unincorporated lots now mysteriously listed as affiliate parcels. The file was pending review, but it had a hand-signed approval stamp from someone named Dean P. Malloy, and I knew for a fact that Malloy had retired in January. They were forging municipal approval documents now. I spent the rest of the night scanning everything and assembling a formal complaint. I didn't bother going through police dispatch this time. I called in direct to a detective I knew at the Caditas County Sheriff's Office, Detective Colin Graves, who'd handled a fraud case I'd consulted on 2 years earlier. "You serious?" he asked, after listening to the whole story. "They submitted a forged lease to the county and faked your signature?" "Worse," I said. "They falsified a zoning document and submitted boundary lines that don't exist." Graves sighed. "Okay, that's more than civil now. Send me everything. I'll open an investigation. Sounds like HOA president's playing emperor." I did. Everything. Videos, screenshots, maps, the whole disgusting paper trail. The next day, a sheriff's unit stopped by Karen's house to request a voluntary interview. She refused. By Thursday, Detective Graves confirmed they had enough to escalate. Criminal investigation into document fraud, unlawful entry, and falsification of public records. But HOA wasn't slowing down. Friday morning, I drove up to check on the cabin and found a new laminated sign nailed to a tree at the trailhead. Notice of default. Owner has failed to fulfill agreed temporary use terms. Property subject to HO community review. Trespassers will be removed. They were escalating it into full-blown fake foreclosure threats now. I called Graves again. "This woman is nuts," I said. "She's trying to fake a hostile takeover." He replied without hesitation. "Let's make it official. Monday morning, I'll walk the DA through it myself. You've got every right to push for criminal charges. And if she's really behind that map, that's felonious." "Good," I said, "because I'm not just pressing charges anymore. I'm going to blow this whole operation open." By Monday morning, I had enough files, photos, and legal ammunition to start a small war. But I didn't want war. I wanted facts. I wanted to know how deep this rabbit hole went, because if Karen was willing to forge leases and maps to get her cousin a free mountain vacation, it begged the question, had she done this before? The answer came faster than I expected. While I was prepping the formal filing for the sheriff's office, I decided to dig into Maple Crest's HOA history. A lot of their documents were public, meeting minutes, community board statements, newsletters archived on their ridiculous HOA website. And buried in the minutes of a meeting from 9 months ago, I found a curious entry. Temporary occupancy coordination, lot number 9, resolved via board consensus. No names, no details, just a hint. So I reached out to someone who might know more. Her name was Amy Patel, a teacher who used to own lot number 9. I'd seen her name pop up as a former resident in a property tax transfer document. A quick search on social media showed she'd moved to a nearby town about 6 months ago. I messaged her directly, explaining who I was and what had happened. She responded within the hour. "You're not the first," she wrote. "We met at a local coffee shop that afternoon." Amy looked tired, like someone who had once cared about being neighborly and then got burned for it. Over a lukewarm chai latte, she told me everything. "I went on a family trip last summer, gone for a week. When I came back, there was a couple living in my guest house. Furniture rearranged, HOA pamphlets on the table. Karen told me I had agreed verbally to let them stay as part of a pilot program. She even gave them keys." "You press charges?" Amy shook her head. I was intimidated. Karen claimed she had board authority, said it would be a civil fight, and I'd lose more in court than I'd get back. So I gave up, sold the place 3 months later. I felt the muscles in my jaw tense. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a pattern. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement. She nodded. If you're going after her, count me in. That night, I called Detective Graves and relayed what I'd learned. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Sounds like we've got a serial abuser of property laws. If we get 3 more like Amy, we're into class action territory." That's when I reached out to a friend of mine, Nate Harrelson, an investigative freelancer who used to work for the Seattle Register. I told him I had a story involving fake leases, illegal housing schemes, and a power-drunk HOA president who thinks she's queen of the mountains. He was interested. I gave Nate everything I had: documents, maps, fake notices, Amy's testimony, even photos of the trail markers Karen's goons had posted near my cabin. He promised to get to work. Meanwhile, I paid another visit to my property. There was a dent in my new lockbox, as if someone had tried to pry it open. The notice of default sign had been replaced with a new one, now printed on metal and drilled into a post near the gate. I yanked it out and stuffed it in my truck. 2 hours later, I was sitting at a long conference table across from Sandra Veliz, a real estate fraud attorney I'd worked with on a high-profile title scam case 2 years ago. I laid out the entire sequence. She didn't even blink. "This is an HOA president who's operating a side business under the table," Sandra said. "She's leveraging community authority to create an underground rental racket. Legally, it's civil trespass, but with the forgeries, we're looking at criminal conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of governance." "I want to burn them down," I said. She smiled. "Then let's take them to court." Not just Karen. The whole HOA. While Sandra began drafting the suit, Nate called me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I found at least 4 other people who had nearly identical run-ins with Karen. 2 agreed to talk. One sent me bank statements showing cash transfers labeled as temporary use donation, all to an account tied to a Shell LLC registered in Spokane. You trace the owner? Karen Dayton. Same address." I stood at the window of my office, looking out at the Seattle skyline, and felt something click into place. This wasn't just a bad neighbor dispute. It was a coordinated abuse of power. A fraud operation using the appearance of community structure to extort, deceive, and benefit friends and family under the guise of solidarity. I didn't care what HOA stood for anymore. In Maple Crest, it stood for Hostile Occupation Authority. And I was done playing defense. Wednesday morning started with a thud. Literally, someone had slammed something heavy against the front gate of my mountain property. My neighbor across the ridge, old Mr. Talbot, texted me a blurry photo of a man in a neon vest affixing a new sign to my locked gate. The message simply read, "They're back." I canceled my morning meetings in Seattle and drove up to the cabin by noon. As I pulled into the gravel turnout, my blood pressure spiked. The metal notice of violation sign was back, but this time accompanied by an official-looking flag bearing the HOA seal and a laminated tag declaring the cabin subject to Community Allocation Emergency Occupancy Protocol. What the hell even is that? A folding chair had been set up on my porch, and sitting in it, scrolling his phone like he was waiting for a pizza, was Jake Dayton. He barely looked up when I parked. "You again," I muttered, getting out of the truck. Jake gave me that same irritating grin. "Karen said you're stalling and that I should stay put. She's filing an emergency claim with the county. You'll be hearing from someone official soon." I stared at him. "You are trespassing. That's a felony. Leave now or I call the sheriff again." He shrugged. "They were already here. Said it's a civil dispute and I should wait for the HOA board's decision." That's when I realized the real game. Karen wasn't trying to win in court. She was trying to wear me down with procedural noise, fake authority, and relentless intimidation. Her tactics were designed to make me crack before anything official happened. Too bad I don't crack. I took detailed photos of the signs, Jake, the tags, even the plastic bins that had been delivered behind my cabin, with HOA stickers on them, as if this was some sanctioned operation. Then I drove straight to the county assessor's office, where I demanded to speak with the real property compliance officer. Her name was Beatrice Kwan, and she was professional, sharp-eyed, and clearly annoyed at how her department's name was being misused. "This form," she said, holding up the laminated tag I'd taken from my gate. "Not ours. Never seen it. That seal is a cheap vector download. This is completely fabricated. You're willing to give a written statement?" "Hell yes," she said. "This is impersonation of a government body. That's criminal impersonation, Section R, CW9, and 8.60.45. Let me call our legal unit." I left with a formal letter on county letterhead declaring the entire emergency occupancy protocol a hoax and sent it straight to Sandra, my attorney. Not an hour later, 2 HOA board members showed up at my primary residence in Seattle, uninvited. One was a woman named Dolores who looked like a retired librarian turned power junkie. The other, Hal, wore mirrored sunglasses and an HOA polo like he was doing security for the president. They handed me a manila envelope marked Urgent Community Response Notice. Inside was a cease and desist letter accusing me of harassment, obstruction of HOA programs, and property abandonment. "I don't belong to your HOA," I said flatly. Hal gestured toward the cabin photo in the packet. "You're on the disputed border. As per recent zoning discussions, Maple Crest Summit has adopted a buffer zone ordinance. That cabin may qualify for shared oversight." I laughed. "You just made that up." Dolores leaned in, whispering with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with a lot. "Mr. Shepard, we're trying to avoid a scandal, but if you keep pushing, we'll have no choice but to escalate. Karen has friends on the zoning board. This could get messy." "Good," I said. "Then you'll love the article going live tonight in the Summit Ledger." They froze. "You might want to tell Karen," I added, "that impersonating a government agency carries jail time. She can read all about it tomorrow. Page 1. That night, Nate's article dropped. Inside the Maple Crest land grab, how a HOA exploited temporary housing to seize private cabins. Full spread, photos, leaked HOA emails, testimonials. Even a diagram showing how Karen mapped out unauthorized occupancy targets. The backlash was instant. My phone lit up with calls from people I didn't even know. Cabin owners, retired vets, part-time residents, all saying they'd had weird run-ins with Karen and they were ready to testify. Some even forwarded HOA letters eerily similar to mine. Sandra's inbox was blowing up, and in the middle of that chaos, I got a voicemail from Karen herself. "Riley, this is Karen Dayton. You've gone too far. What you're doing is slander. You don't understand how things work up here. But you will." The tone wasn't angry. It was controlled, cold, almost rehearsed. That made it worse, because when someone like Karen stops yelling and starts planning, you know the gloves are off. I don't know what I expected the morning after Nate's article dropped, but it sure wasn't the absolute circus that unfolded. By 10 a.m., my cabin was crawling with reporters. I didn't even tell them how to find it. Someone from within the HOA must have leaked the location. Local news vans lined the dirt turnout like it was a celebrity crime scene. Drones buzzed overhead. A woman from Channel 8 tried to interview Jake as he walked out onto the porch shirtless, holding a cup of coffee like he owned the place. He slammed the door the moment they asked, "Did you know you were trespassing on a private home?" By noon, the story had gone regional. HOA Power Trip was trending on the state subreddit. The governor's office even issued a vague statement about reviewing the scope and authority of private residential associations in unincorporated areas. It was vague, sure, but it was something. The cracks had started. Karen, however, did not take the hint. She doubled down. A courier arrived at my Seattle office that afternoon with a large tube and an envelope. Inside the envelope, a printed notice of injunction on HOA letterhead declaring that due to ongoing disruption of Maple Crest's emergency occupancy program, I was now officially barred from approaching the cabin property until legal review. Concluded, in the tube, a giant under investigation do not enter banner that, according to Karen's cover letter, had already been installed on site by security personnel. That's when I got the next phone call from my neighbor, Mr. Talbot again. "You better get up here, Riley," he said, breathing hard. "You're not going to believe what these psychos did now." 3 hours later, I was back in the woods, hiking the trail with my phone filming. The HOA had brought in a private security guard, some guy in tactical pants and Oakleys, who tried to block me from accessing my own property. He claimed it was standard protocol under the protective injunction. I showed him the county deed, the land boundary plat, and the letter from the county compliance office. He blinked. "I just go where they tell me, man." "Then you're trespassing," I said, "and impersonating enforcement." He left in 5 minutes. But I stayed, and what I saw inside nearly made my jaw hit the pine floorboards. They had staged the cabin. Furniture rearranged, framed HOA documents on the walls, a fake community information packet on the kitchen counter, Even a photo of Jake with Karen, smiling like this was a happy little lodge exchange. I took pictures of everything. It wasn't just invasion anymore. This was evidence tampering, staging a property to appear as part of a legal lease arrangement when none existed. I called Sandra and uploaded everything to a secure drive. That same night, Jake was finally arrested. Turns out one of the reporters had done a background check and discovered Jake was already on probation for fraud-related activity, using false tenancy claims to squat in high-value properties. He wasn't just Karen's cousin, he was her weaponized pawn, and this wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. I watched them take him away from the cabin in handcuffs. No fanfare, no shouting. Just a quiet, pale-faced Jake escorted down my trail by deputies, while Karen's security guy stood awkwardly in the background pretending he wasn't involved. The last thing Jake said to me before the cops pushed him into the cruiser: "She said you'd never fight this hard." And that was the moment I knew Karen had done this many times before, always banking on the fact that nobody would go all the way. But I was going all the way. The arrest of Jake Dayton lit a fire I didn't know I still had in me. Watching him being driven off the mountain in cuffs was satisfying, sure, but it wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. Back in Seattle, I met with Sandra in her office, and we laid everything out on the table. Literally, photos, the fake lease, copies of the fraudulent zoning map, witness statements from Mr. Talbot and the sheriff's deputies, emails from HOA officers, and Jake's probation records. It was a full-blown case file, and Sandra's eyes lit up like Christmas. "We're not just filing a civil suit anymore," she said. "This is criminal conspiracy, property fraud, zoning misrepresentation, misuse of HOA authority, impersonation of code enforcement. Riley, this could bury her." Good, because that was the plan. Sandra filed 2 separate motions: a civil suit for damages, and an immediate criminal referral to the county prosecutor. Within 48 hours, a judge signed off on an emergency protective injunction, this time real, affirming that Karen Dayton and any HOA representative were barred from approaching my cabin or communicating with me directly. At the same time, I'd been quietly coordinating with Nate, the reporter. His follow-up article included interviews with 2 more property owners, both of whom had similar stories. Temporary relatives of Karen borrowing their empty guest houses or vacation rentals under sketchy, unofficial community support programs. In both cases, the owners hadn't pushed back. One was elderly and afraid of retaliation. The other just assumed it wasn't worth the legal mess. That all changed when they saw Jake get arrested. Karen, meanwhile, started to unravel publicly. In a desperate PR move, she organized a Maple Crest HOA town hall streamed on Facebook Live, where she rambled for over 40 minutes about community resilience, voluntary relocation agreements, and how I was weaponizing the media against hard-working families just trying to find a roof. The comments were brutal. Nobody was buying it anymore. 3 days later, I got a call from the county district attorney's office. They were opening an investigation, not just into Karen, but into Maple Crest HOA as a whole, including their financials, zoning activities, and internal communications. Apparently, someone from the HOABoard had turned over emails, a whistleblower. Sandra and I knew this was the break we needed. She drafted a subpoena request for the HOA's full ledger, as well as access logs for their security contractors' activities at my property. Every hour that passed, more dots were being connected. That week, I also got a visit from Detective Alina Perez, an investigator from the state's Office of Consumer Protection. She specialized in HOA corruption and regulatory fraud, and she looked absolutely thrilled with the file I handed her. "This one's going into my permanent record," she smirked. Karen really thought she could outpaper a corporate attorney. I almost feel sorry for her. I didn't. That weekend, I returned to my cabin, this time legally and undisputed, and changed the locks again. I installed motion-activated security lights, bolted down a surveillance box to the porch post, and planted a hand-painted wooden sign at the head of the trail. Private property. Trespassers will be legally destroyed. It was probably overkill. But after everything they'd done, I wanted there to be no doubt. Let them try again. By the time the subpoenas landed on the desks at Maple Crest's HOA office, the house of cards had already started to shake. What came next was the sound of it falling brick by brick. The whistleblower turned out to be Paulie Martin, HOA treasurer and a former CPA. He came forward after reading Nate's second article and realizing that if he didn't cooperate, he'd go down with the rest. Through his lawyer, he handed over 6 years' worth of HOA internal emails, invoices, and financial reports, including several line items flagged as community facilitation payments. Turns out, that was Karen's code for money she took under the table from these so-called temporary tenants. Over 20 separate payments from different names, most of them traced back to friends, distant family, or politically connected consultants. The worst part? Karen had filed municipal reimbursement requests, claiming these guests were part of a sanctioned emergency housing initiative, which, of course, didn't exist. Detective Perez sent me a single-sentence text. This woman built a rental racket using HOA cover and municipal forms. We're going full RICO. I couldn't believe it. A RICO case, racketeering against a suburban HOA president. But it didn't stop there. 2 former board members came forward, one of whom had signed off on forged zoning maps under pressure from Karen. Another had handled the temporary keys program, a euphemism for duplicating private property keys without owner's consent. The locksmith's logs matched dates of complaints filed by at least 4 homeowners who'd claimed they found evidence of unknown people staying in their homes. It was bigger than I'd thought. Sandra and I met again with the DA's office. They were moving forward with a grand jury indictment. Karen was being charged with fraudulent misrepresentation of ownership boundaries, forgery of legal documents, illegal rental operations under false pretenses, obstruction of justice, false police reports, racketeering under state law. Meanwhile, HOA Maple Crest's bank accounts were frozen under court order. The association's operations were suspended pending full audit. Homeowners, many of whom had no idea what Karen had been doing, were now flooding the city with complaints. HOA dues collection had stopped overnight. Their website went down. Their security patrol quit. Karen was subpoenaed for deposition, but instead of showing up with counsel, she attempted to represent herself. The hearing lasted 12 minutes before the judge cut her off, stating on record, "You are neither a licensed attorney nor capable of forming a coherent defense. I strongly advise you retain legal representation before this spirals further." It was already too late for her. The day of her arrest, I happened to be at the cabin. I was sitting on the porch drinking coffee when I saw a black Tahoe roll up the access road, then 2 cruisers, then another. And Karen, still in one of her pastel blazers, standing at her gate yelling at the officers to get off HOA territory. They didn't even respond. She was cuffed and escorted down the slope while still ranting about bylaws and community orders. I don't know what she thought was going to happen. Maybe she still believed she was untouchable. She wasn't. As for her cousin Jake, he had already accepted a plea deal, testifying against her in exchange for avoiding prison. He sat in court looking like a soaked rat, describing how Karen orchestrated the whole scheme, even coaching him on how to lie to police if I showed up. That was the nail in her coffin. The courtroom was packed the morning Karen's trial began. Every bench creaked with bodies, journalists, HOA members, homeowners from Maple Crest, even city officials who wanted to see if their own departments had been duped by the same woman who once bragged about hosting holiday galas in her community. I sat quietly in the 3rd row, next to Sandra, my attorney. She wore her signature gray blazer and kept her arms folded like she was watching an execution. In a way, she was. The prosecution laid it out surgically. Timeline, documents, financial records, emails. Witness after witness came up. Former board members, locksmiths, even Paulie the treasurer. Each one gave another slice of the puzzle. And then came Jake. Jake Dayton took the stand, pale and sweating, clearly not built for courtrooms. He testified that Karen had told him, word for word, "Just walk in like you live there. If the owner makes trouble, we call the cops and say he's dangerous." He described the fake lease, how Karen had filled it out herself using an old template and a forged signature. She even walked him through what to say to deputies. The jury didn't flinch, not once. Then Sandra presented my property deed, the original unbroken title chain from my father, the unedited survey maps notarized and filed. The defense tried to argue that I had implied consent by not living in the cabin full-time. That's when Sandra pulled out the guest log I'd kept for years, showing every weekend I'd spent there, including photos time-stamped on cloud backups. That shut the defense down like a trap snapping shut. But it was the city inspector's testimony that made the room gasp. He revealed that Karen had personally submitted a revised zoning map to the planning office, falsely claiming that Maple Crest's HOA boundary extended 20 feet into my property. Not only that, she had forged a secondary signature from a city clerk, a clerk who had died 2 years earlier. I leaned over to Sandra. Did she seriously ghost sign a dead guy? She nodded, eyes on the judge. Bold strategy. Let's see if it pays off. It didn't. The judge called a recess before reading the verdict, but no one left. We all waited. When he returned, he didn't waste time. In over 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such an egregious abuse of positional authority. The defendant weaponized her HOA position, falsified legal documents, trespassed on private property, and endangered an innocent citizen with false police reports. This was not mismanagement. This was premeditated fraud. Karen Dayton was found guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 5. Jake got 2 years probation plus community service. The HOA was declared non-functional and subject to receivership. The state appointed a special administrator to oversee its dissolution. In the following weeks, I received apologies from a few former HOA members. Some claimed they had no idea what Karen was doing. Maybe they were lying. Maybe not. I didn't care. The cabin was mine again. Clean, quiet, untouched. I replaced the front lock with a biometric one and installed 2 new trail cameras along the ridge. Not paranoia, just policy. I also had a custom sign carved from red cedar and posted it right by the gravel path. Private, lawyer inside. Trespassers get served. Legally. 1 month later, I launched a nonprofit with Sandra called Know Your Land, aimed at helping homeowners navigate legal threats from overreaching HOAs. We offered seminars, webinars, legal templates, even emergency response guides. The case made headlines in property law circles. I ended up being invited to speak at the University of Washington School of Law, guest lecture on civil defense against community overreach, and every weekend, like clockwork, I returned to the mountains. No more padlocks. No more suitcases on my porch, just trees, wind, the cabin, and peace earned the hard way.